At my birthday party, my mother-in-law whispered something in my husband's ear, and I saw the shift in his eyes before I could react. The next moment, his slap sent me crashing to the floor. Stunned, I lay there as he turned to walk away, until a slow chuckle escaped my lips. He froze, his face drained of color. The email glowed on my screen like a confession. The Harrington Trust disbursement requires continuous marital status of no less than 5 years with no separation filings. My hand trembled as I forwarded it to my encrypted server, the final piece slotting into place. Behind me, the gray Boston dawn filtered through designer curtains. James had insisted on curtains that cost more than my first car. I slammed my laptop shut as the bathroom door opened. Steam billowed out as James emerged, towel wrapped around his waist. His body still magnificent at 37, his eyes however held that increasingly vacant look I'd been documenting for months. "Happy birthday, Elise," he said. The words rehearsed, hollow. He bent to kiss my cheek. His lips cool despite the hot shower. "Mother's excited about tonight. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're enjoying these stories of empowerment, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us build this amazing community. Let's dive in." "I'm sure she is," I thought, but replied with practiced warmth. It was so generous of Victoria to arrange everything. My voice, the one I'd perfected in courtrooms to sway juries, didn't betray the ice forming inside my chest. "What are you working on?" he asked, glancing at my closed laptop. "Just reviewing the Westbrook merger documents," I lied smoothly. "Even birthday girls don't get days off at Caldwell and Pierce." He nodded, accepting this without question. When we'd first met 6 years ago, he would have teased me about my workaholic tendencies. Maybe tried to coax me back to bed. That James Waugh S gone now, replaced by this polished automaton who responded to his family's signals like a trained animal. As he dressed for his morning at the family office, I retreated to my walk-in closet. The one place in our Beacon Hill brownstone without cameras. Victoria had installed the surveillance system last year during our renovation. A thoughtful security measure for her beloved son and daughter-in-law. Only I knew about the tiny devices I discovered during a methodical search 3 months ago. Only knew that I'd left them functional but fed them a loop of routine activity whenever I needed privacy. Inside the closet, I pressed my fingertip against a nearly invisible seam in the wall. A panel slid open, revealing a water-resistant case containing hard drives, a backup laptop, and 3 burner phones. My insurance policy, my weapon. For 4 years, I'd been the picture-perfect addition to the Harrington dynasty. Harvard Law graduate, rising star at Boston's most prestigious corporate law firm, charitable foundation board member, and devoted wife to James Harrington, heir to one of New England's oldest fortunes. The society pages loved us. Victoria paraded me at every function like a prize thoroughbred. No one suspected that behind my carefully applied makeup and designer clothes, I was building a case that would bring the Harrington empire crashing down. It started with discrepancies I noticed while helping James review some family business documents. Numbers that didn't add up, subsidiaries in countries with questionable banking laws. Then came the strange meetings James would return from with altered behavior. More withdrawn, less decisive. The way Victoria would whisper things in his ear at family gatherings that would change his demeanor instantly. I'd spent 3 years defending corporations against fraud allegations. I knew what financial manipulation looked like. I knew what psychological control looked like too. The day I found James staring catonically at a video sent by his cousin William was the day I began my secret investigation in earnest. That night, I purchased the first burner phone from my hidden cache. I extracted a micro SD card and inserted it into my secure phone. The encrypted files contained everything: bank transfers to offshore accounts, recordings of family meetings where they spoke openly about conditioning certain responses in James, evidence of market manipulation, and bribes to federal officials. My fingers scrolled to the newest file, of photograph taken yesterday of Thomas Whitley, James's supposed childhood therapist, meeting with Victoria at her Back Bay home. The same man referenced in documents as a behavioral consultant and paid $30,000 monthly from a Harrington shell company. I checked my watch. 7:15 a.m. Nearly time to become Elise Harrington again. I replaced everything, sealed the compartment, and selected a conservative St. John suit for court that morning. The Prescott hearing would finish by noon, giving me time to change for my birthday celebration at Victoria's favorite harborside restaurant. As I applied my makeup, I practiced my expressions in the mirror: delighted surprise, gracious appreciation, devoted affection. The same expressions I'd worn for years while collecting evidence against the people who had hollowed out my husband and built a criminal enterprise behind a philanthropic facade. James appeared in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a custom suit, his hair perfectly styled. Once, seeing him like this would have quickened my pulse. Now, I catalogued the changes in him: the slightly diminished pupils, the microscopic delay before emotional responses, the new tension in his jaw. "You look beautiful," he said mechanically. "Thank you, darling." I stood and straightened his already perfect tie, studying his eyes for any flicker of the man I'd married. "Nothing. I'll see you tonight. Don't let your mother go overboard with the surprises." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "She just wants everything perfect for you." Perfect, the Harringtons' favorite word. Their perfect family, perfect business, perfect control. As I gathered my briefcase and court materials, my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Blue Valentino tonight. James loves you in that color." Another command disguised as motherly advice. I texted back a grateful response, then selected the crimson Dior I'd been saving for a special occasion. Small rebellions kept me sane while I assembled my case. In the Uber to the courthouse, I reviewed my actual casework, compartmentalizing as I'd learned to do. By day, I was still Elise Harrington, corporate defense attorney. My clients relied on me. Ironically, the skills that made me effective in their defense had made me devastating in building my case against the Harringtons. At the courthouse steps, I checked my secure messaging app. My contact at the SEC had confirmed receipt of my latest intelligence. "Moving on this next week," he'd written. "Need anything more from your source?" I smiled as I typed back, "One final piece coming tonight." Little did Victoria know that her elaborate birthday trap for me would instead become the Harrington unmasking. Tonight, at my birthday celebration surrounded by Boston's elite and the family's closest allies, everything would change. I tucked my phone away and ascended the courthouse steps, my expression serene, my posture confident. Inside, I was counting down the hours. The perfect facade was about to shatter, and I would be there, camera phone in hand, to capture every damning moment. The Hestia Gardens shimmered like a mirage at the edge of Boston Harbor, its glass and steel architecture catching the sunset in hues of gold and crimson. Fitting, I thought, for what promised to be a bloodletting disguised as a celebration. The restaurant had a 3-month waiting list, but the Harrington name had secured not just a reservation but the entire rooftop terrace. "Mrs. Harrington, welcome." The matriarch practically bowed as our town car arrived. "Mrs. Victoria has been asking about you." "I'm sure she has," I murmured, accepting James's mechanical arm. He'd been silent during our ride, checking his watch every few minutes as if timing his performance. The elevator ascended smoothly to the rooftop, and I used those moments to center myself. My crimson Dior hugged my body like armor, the color a silent declaration of war against Victoria's Blue Valentino directive. James hadn't even noticed my defiance, another sign of his detachment. The doors opened to a carefully orchestrated tableau. Crystal chandeliers suspended from invisible wires created the illusion of stars floating above the harbor view. White orchids, Victoria's signature, adorned every surface, and positioned strategically throughout the space were approximately 50 guests, all smiling with the practiced warmth of predators. "Happy birthday," the collector Ives' greeting washed over me as artificial as the orchid's perfume. Victoria glided forward, resplendent in midnight blue Chanel, her silver bob gleaming under the chandeliers. At 62, she remained striking, the grande dame of Boston society, whose ruthlessness was exceeded only by her skill at concealing it. "Darling Elise," she embraced me, her Hermes perfume enveloping me like chloroform. Her lips brushed my cheek as she whispered, "Blue would have complimented James better for the photographs." "I wanted to surprise everyone," I replied, matching her steel warmth. Even on my birthday, her eyes flashed the first authentic response I'd seen from her in months. She recovered instantly, linking her arm through mine to parade me through my celebration. Everyone important is here, she announced, leading me past Boston's elite, the police commissioner, 2 state senators, a federal judge, 3 university presidents. I noted each face, mentally checking them against my files of Harrington connections. Not any of my law partners, not my closest friend from Harvard, not my mentor from my first firm. The guest list had been sanitized of anyone with genuine connection to me, anyone who might notice if something were to happen to the real Elise beneath the Harrington veneer. Champagne, birthday girl. William Harrington, James's cousin and the family's legal fixer, appeared at my elbow with 2 flutes. Thank you, Will, I accepted, not drinking. Lovely to see you here, wouldn't miss it, he replied, his Harvard-educated drawl stretched thin over something urgent. His eyes darted to the entrance where I noticed a silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit being escorted in. Excuse me a moment, I watched Will intercept the newcomer Thomas Whitley, the childhood therapist whose practices had apparently extended well beyond conventional treatment. The man who received monthly payments categorized as behavioral maintenance in the Harringtons' private ledgers. A server with canapes provided perfect cover to drift closer to their conversation. Timeline requires acceleration, W was saying, his back to the party. The trustees won't extend again, pushing the protocol risks instability. Whitley replied, his clinical tone unmistakable even in hushed conversation. The conditioning requires we don't have that luxury anymore. We'll cut in. The contractual obligations are clear. If he's not fully controlled by the disbursement date. They noticed my proximity and pivoted smoothly to greetings. Whitley's handshake was brief, his eyes assessing me with clinical detachment. Mrs. Harrington, happy birthday, he said. You look radiant. Thank you, Dr. Whitley. James mentioned you might attend. I lied. It's been 15 years since you worked with him. His smile tightened. On and off the Harringtons are more like family than clients. How fortunate for everyone, I replied, noting the slight dilation of his pupils. He was nervous. Good. Throughout the next I circulated carefully, playing my role while observing the room's dynamics. Victoria remained at the epicenter, her laughter theatrical, her eyes constantly tracking me. Whenever James approached me, her attention intensified as if monitoring a laboratory experiment. James himself moved through the party like a sleepwalker, responding to guests with programmed pleasantries. Twice I caught Whitley watching our interactions, making subtle notes on his phone. Wonderful turnout, remarked Judge Holloway, one of the Harringtons' longest allies. Victoria certainly knows how to celebrate family. Indeed, I agreed, though I'm surprised my law colleagues couldn't make it. Exclusive guest list, he chuckled. Victoria was quite specific about keeping this intimate. By intimate, he meant controlled. Vulnerability prickled at the back of my neck. This celebration was hermetically sealed. Anyone here would side with the Harringtons if something happened to me. The party shifted to dinner, Victoria orchestrating the seating with tactical precision. James to my right, her at the head of the table, Whitley positioned directly across from me, his gaze clinically assessing every interaction between James and me. Victoria tapped her crystal glass, silencing conversation. Before we dine, a toast to my beloved daughter-in-law, she stood, commanding the room with practiced authority. 5 years ago, James brought home this brilliant, beautiful attorney, and I knew immediately she was special. Her eyes met mine, warm on the surface, glacial beneath. Elise has become everything the Harrington family values: loyal, discreet, and committed to our legacy. The gathering murmured approval. I maintained my grateful smile while translating her actual message. We own you, Elise. Victoria raised her glass. May this 35th year be transformative. The word hung in the air like a promise or a threat. As servers presented the first course, Victoria glided behind my chair, resting manicured hands on my shoulders. To onlookers, a maternal gesture. I felt the predatory pressure of her grip. Such a perfect evening, she murmured, her voice carrying just to my ears. And after dinner, a very special announcement about the family's future. Her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on my shoulder before she moved away, leaving behind the lingering scent of her perfume and the distinct impression of a trap about to spring. I glanced at James, finding his eyes fixed on his water glass, fingers tapping a rhythmic pattern I documented in my notes, a behavior that always followed Victoria's private conversations with him. Whatever they had planned for tonight was accelerating. The gift presentation would come after the main course, Victoria's chosen moment for whatever announcement she had orchestrated. I touched the slim phone in my clutch, confirming it was ready to record. The federal agents I'd been working with were on standby, waiting for my signal. The first course arrived, oysters arranged in a perfect circle. Victoria beamed at me from the head of the table, raising her glass in another silent toast. I smiled back, lifting my untouched champagne. Let the games begin. The main course plates were cleared away, leaving behind an expectant hush. Victoria nodded to the wait staff, who began arranging an elaborate display of wrapped gifts on a marble-top table wheeled to the center of the terrace, all part of the spectacle. Gifts I suspected were as empty as the smiles surrounding me. Before dessert, Victoria announced, commanding the room with practiced ease. We must honor our birthday girl properly. The guests arranged themselves in a perfect semicircle, smartphones appearing in manicured hands. In prior years, I might have felt uncomfortable being the center of attention. Tonight, I welcomed every camera. James guided me to the gift table with a hand pressed firmly against the small of my back. His touch, once warm and reassuring, now felt mechanical, a practiced gesture rather than an intimate connection. Start with this one, Victoria instructed, handing me a small box wrapped in signature Tiffany blue. A collective murmur of appreciation rippled through the gathering. I accepted it with a practiced smile, unwrapping it deliberately. Inside, nestled on white satin, lay a platinum bracelet studded with diamonds, a beautiful handcuff. It's lovely, I said, holding it up for the requisite photographs. James, help your wife put it on, Victoria directed. As he fastened it around my wrist, I felt the weight of it, another link in their chain. The performance continued through several more gifts, all expensive, all selected to reinforce my position as a Harrington possession rather than an individual, a designer handbag, a weekend at their Martha's Vineyard estate, a donation in my name to the Harrington Foundation. And now, Victoria's voice softened dramatically for our special announcement. She glided forward, her movement so precisely timed it might have been choreographed. The scent of her Aries perfume arrived a moment before she did, wrapping around me like an invisible constrictor. The room stilled. All eyes focused on our trio, Victoria, James, and me, arranged like figures on a chessboard. Her hand rested on James's shoulder, fingers digging in slightly at precise pressure points I'd documented in my research on physical triggers. Elise has been such a treasure to our family, Victoria began, her voice honeyed with false warmth. Devoted, supportive, the perfect partner for James during these 5 critical years of his career. 5 years, the exact duration specified in the trust disbursement conditions. Victoria's eyes gleamed as she leaned closer to James, her lips nearly touching his ear. I activated the recording function on my phone with a discreet movement. Remember your duty, she whispered. Though in the hushed room, the words carried. Protect what's ours. I watched it happen in slow motion. James's pupils constricted to pinpoints. His jaw slackened momentarily before tightening into a rigid line. The slight tremor in his left hand stilled completely. Then came the words, delivered in a flat tone I'd never heard from him before. You've betrayed us. The room held its collective breath. Victoria stepped back, satisfaction glinting in her eyes as she watched her creation perform. What do you mean? James the First asked, my voice steady despite the electric anticipation coursing through me. We know about the investigation, he continued, each word measured, programmed. About the files, the contacts with the SEC. Gasps rippled through the gathering, exactly as I'd anticipated. Victoria wanted witnesses to my alleged betrayal, creating a narrative before the federal case could break. What I hadn't fully anticipated was what came next. James's arm moved with shocking speed. The sound of the slap echoed across the terrace like a gunshot, followed by absolute silence. The impact knocked me sideways against the marble table. I tasted copper as my lips split. The cool floor pressed against my cheek as I lay there, feeling the sting bloom across my face. For 3 heartbeats, nothing moved. Boston's elite stood frozen, witnessing a fracture in the perfect Harrington facade. Then, as Victoria moved to speak, to spin this into another narrative, poor James, pushed to the brink by his treacherous wife, something unexpected happened. I laughed. It started small, a bubble of sound that escaped my bloodied lips. Then it grew, resonating across the stunned gathering. I pushed myself up, crimsoned ear smeared with blood, and continued laughing, clear, genuine laughter that cut through the manufactured atmosphere like a blade. Perfect timing, Victoria, I said, my voice carrying across the silent terrace. Every smartphone still raised, still recording. You couldn't have scripted it better if you tried. Confusion clouded her perfectly composed features. This wasn't in her scenario. The disgraced wife was to cower, to plead, perhaps to threaten weakly before being escorted out. James, she snapped, help your wife up. She's clearly unwell. But James stood motionless, horror dawning in his eyes as the programming fractured. He stared at his hand as if it belonged to someone else. What did I just do? He whispered, the vacant look receding. Elise, I rose without assistance, dabbing at my split lip with a white linen napkin. The bright blood bloomed across it like a Japanese watercolor. You should check your phones, I addressed the gathering calmly. You've all just witnessed and recorded a perfect demonstration of the Harrington conditioning program. The same program documented in the files I've spent years collecting. I turned to face Victoria directly, savoring the moment. Her composure began to crack. 5 years, Victoria, that was the requirement for James to access his grandfather's trust. A stable marriage for 5 years. I smiled, tasting blood. But assault in front of witnesses tends to complicate divorce proceedings, doesn't it? Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by something I'd never seen there before, fear. You did this deliberately, she hissed. You provoked us. I didn't have to, I replied. You've been conditioning James for years. All I had to do was wait and document. I gestured to the crowd of shocked faces and raised phones. And now so has everyone else. The puzzle pieces I'd assembled over years, the financial fraud, the psychological manipulation, the carefully orchestrated control of James, had just been validated by their own actions in front of the very power structure they'd cultivated. My phone is sending interesting data packages to several agencies right now, I continued conversationally, including evidence of how Thomas Whitley here helped condition James to respond to specific triggers. I nodded toward the therapist, who had gone deathly pale. The PH physical response programming was particularly effective, wouldn't you say, Doctor? The first chime of a news alert sounded from someone's phone, then another, and another. My dead man switch had activated the moment the GPS in my phone registered an impact consistent with physical assault, sending my complete evidence package to the authorities and select media outlets. Victoria's empire wasn't just cracking. It was imploding in real time in front of the very society she'd manipulated for decades. And as I stood there, blood on my lips and triumph in my heart, I knew there was no going back. You can't possibly, Victoria began, but froze as her phone chimed with the same news alert now rippling through the gathering. James stood paralyzed, staring at his hand as if it belonged to someone else. The horror of his action visibly dawning on him. His programming was breaking down, cracks appearing in the facade that had been constructed around his true self. Elise, I didn't mean to, he whispered. I don't know why his voice cracked, genuine emotion breaking through the conditioning. I know you didn't, I said softly, addressing him directly for the first time in months. That's exactly my point. I turned to face the stunned audience. These powerful people who had been the Harringtons' shield and sword for decades. The blood on my lip gave me a strange authority, the power of undeniable truth. For those checking your phones, yes, that alert is about the Harrington family. I confirmed, my courtroom voice carrying clearly across the terrace. What you've just witnessed is the culmination of a 5-year investigation into one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in Boston. Judge Holloway's face had gone ashen. Senator Prescott was already backing toward the exit. I locked eyes with each of them, ensuring they understood their complicity was also documented. The Harrington Foundation has laundered approximately $340 million through its charitable programs, I continued, diverting funds intended for education initiatives into offshore accounts controlled by shell companies in the Cayman Islands and Singapore. Victoria's composure was unraveling visibly now. Her perfectly manicured hand clutching at her throat where a pulse hammered beneath her diamond necklace. "You have no proof," she hissed. But her eyes darted to Thomas Whitley, who had begun inching toward the exit. "Dr. Whitley, perhaps you'd care to explain to everyone the meaning of Project Sentinel," I called out, stopping him in his tracks. "The behavioral modification program you've been implementing on James since he was 12 years old, designed to ensure complete compliance with family directives." Whitley froze, his clinical detachment vanishing as 50 pairs of eyes turned to him. "That's privileged therapeutic information," he stammered, clinging to professional jargon as a shield. "Therapeutic," I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what you call conditioning a child to respond to specific physical and verbal triggers? Programming responses that override his conscious will?" I gestured to James, who had sunk into a chair, his face buried in his hands. "Would you like to explain the monthly payments of $30,000 categorized as behavioral maintenance in the Harringtons' private ledgers?" I turned back to the gathering, using every skill I'd honed in the courtroom to hold their attention. "My evidence package, which has now been received by the SEC, FBI, and the Boston Globe, contains over 2,000 documents detailing financial fraud, tax evasion, market manipulation, and most disturbingly, the psychological abuse of James Harrington to maintain control of the family fortune." William Harrington stepped forward, adopting his most authoritative legal tone. "These are wild accusations from a disgruntled wife. If there were any truth to them, the Westlake acquisition," I interrupted, naming a deal that had made headlines the previous year. "Insider trading based on information obtained through blackmail of a Securities and Exchange Commission official. The documents include the original communications, the payments made to shell companies, and the exact trading patterns that followed." William's confident expression faltered as I named the specific transaction. I continued relentlessly. "The charitable donation to Boston Children's Hospital last year, lauded in every newspaper. 87% of those funds were redirected through 3 separate foundations before landing in an account controlled by Victoria Harrington in Zurich." I met Victoria's gaze directly. "Account number, opened under the name Helen Marin, your mother's maiden name." The specificity of the details silenced any further objections in the crowd. Phones were now being used not just to read alerts but to search for corroborating information. The evidence I'd spent years collecting was becoming public knowledge in real time. Victoria, ever the strategist, attempted to regain control of the narrative. "Elise has been under tremendous pressure with her caseload," she began, adopting a concerned tone. "We've been worried about her mental health for months. Shall we discuss the surveillance system installed in our home during last year's renovation?" I countered. "Or the medication added to my evening tea on nights when I work late on certain cases? I've had blood tests documenting the sedatives for months." A new murmur rippled through the crowd. The calculated gaslighting was exactly what many of these powerful women had experienced themselves in Boston's elite circles. I turned to Dr. Whitley, who stood paralyzed with indecision. "Dr. Whitley has a choice to make tonight," I announced. "The federal agents who have received my evidence package will be particularly interested in his records of the conditioning program." However, I paused deliberately, making sure he was listening closely. "I'm prepared to recommend immunity in exchange for is complete testimony about the methods used and who authorized them." Whitley's eyes widened at the lifeline being thrown. "The same applies to anyone in this room," I continued, addressing the gathering. "Those who come forward voluntarily with information will be viewed very differently from those who wait for subpoenas." The strategic fracturing of the Harrington alliance was happening faster than even I had anticipated. Already, small groups were forming with conversations indicating alliances shifting like tectonic plates. James looked up at me, his eyes clearer than I'd seen them in months. The programming temporarily disrupted by the shock. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice barely audible. 3 years, I replied quietly. "At first, I noticed small inconsistencies in your behavior after family meetings. Then the vacant episodes became more frequent. The final piece was finding Whitley's name on those payment records." "I never wanted to hurt you," he whispered, genuine anguish breaking through. "I know," I said. "That's why I've spent 3 years building this case instead of simply leaving. You weren't the only victim, James." Victoria, seeing her control slipping away completely, made a final desperate attempt. This is absurd, James. Tell them. But James was staring at the blood on my lip, a terrible recognition dawning. As memories began breaking through the conditioning. You did this to me, he said to his mother. All those sessions with Dr. Whitley when I was a child. The special educational programs every summer. This isn't the first time you've made me. He couldn't finish the sentence. Horror washing over his features. The elevator doors opened, revealing two men in suits who surveyed the scene with professional detachment. Perfect timing, I noted. Recognizing my contacts from the FBI. Gentlemen, I believe several people here are eager to make statements. The evidence I've gathered was no longer just files on secured serve. Heirs. It was unfolding in human drama across the rooftop terrace. As decades of manipulation, fraud, and control began to unravel thread by thread. And at the center stood Victoria. Her empire crumbling. Her mask of perfection finally irrevocably shattered. The FBI agents moved with practiced efficiency, securing the exits while introducing themselves to the increasingly agitated crowd. One of them, Agent Rivera, whom I'd been feeding information to for months, gave me a nearly imperceptible nod as he approached Victoria. Mrs. Harrington, we have a warrant to seize all electronic devices and documents in your possession. He stated, his tone professionally neutral as he presented the paperwork. Victoria's hand trembled as she took the document, her eyes scanning it with the desperate intensity of someone searching for an escape clause. Finding none, she turned to William, who had already begun backing away from her. The family's legal fixer already calculating his own exit strategy. This is absurd, she insisted, but her voice had lost its authoritative edge. Do you know who I am? Who we know. That's precisely why we're here, Mrs. Harrington, Agent Rivera replied. Around us, the elegant birthday celebration had transformed into a scene of barely contained chaos. Servers stood frozen, champagne bottles still in hand as the Boston elite began their strategic retreats. Judge Holloway was already speaking urgently into his phone. Senator Prescott's wife was tugging at his sleeve, distancing themselves from the Harrington nucleus. Phones continued buzzing with increasing urgency. I caught glimpses of headlines flashing across screens breaking Harrington family under federal investigation. Boston's elite philanthropic family accused of massive fraud. Psychological manipulation allegations rock Harrington empire. The Boston Globe had moved faster than I'd anticipated, already publishing the first wave of revelations from my evidence package. Social media would be exploding within minutes. The carefully constructed Harrington mystique was unraveling in real time. Victoria made one last desperate attempt to maintain control, raising her voice to address the scattering guests. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. A family dispute being tragically misrepresented. Her perfectly modulated voice cracked slightly. I'm sure we can count on our friends too, Victoria. The police commissioner, who moments ago had been laughing at her jokes, cut her off with a tight smile. I think it's best if we speak tomorrow through counsel. The abandonment was beginning like rats from a sinking ship. The powerful figures who had protected the Harringtons for decades were rapidly recalculating their own exposure. Nearby, James had collapsed into a chair, his breathing ragged. The psychological walls constructed around his authentic self were crumbling, leaving him exposed to a flood of emerging memories and realizations. The summers at the lake house, he muttered, eyes unfocused. The special lessons with Dr. Whitley. The headaches whenever I questioned family decisions. I approached him cautiously, unsure of how stable he was in this transitional state. Despite everything, despite the sting of his slap still fresh on my face, I felt a complex mixture of vindication and concern. He had been both my tormentor and fellow victim. James, I said softly, kneeling beside him but maintaining a safe distance. The conditioning is breaking down. It's going to be disorienting. His eyes found mine, clearer than I'd seen them in years. I hurt you, he whispered, horror washing over his face as he reached toward my split lip, stopping short of touching me. I would never, but I did. I remember being told you were programmed to respond to specific triggers. I explained, my voice steady. Victoria's whispered command activated a response that wasn't truly yours. Across the room, Thomas Whitley was already deep in conversation with the second FBI agent, his clinical detachment replaced by nervous self-preservation. I caught phrases like following instructions and didn't know the full extent. How much do you remember about the conditioning? I asked James. He pressed his palms against his temples. Fragments. Sessions in the study at the lake house. Words repeated while I was under medication. Punishments when I resisted. His voice broke. They've been doing this to me since I was 12. My own family. My own mother. The realization seemed to physically pain him. His body curling forward as if wounded. Here was the real James emerging from beneath layers of programming. Vulnerable. Horrified. Genuine. Victoria, seeing our conversation, attempted to intervene. James, darling, don't listen to her. She called, desperation making her voice shrill. She's turned you against your family. After everything we've done for you. After everything you've done too. He corrected, rising to face her. The evidence includes video recordings of conditioning sessions, Victoria. Sessions where you personally instructed Dr. Whitley on which behaviors to suppress in your son. Victoria's face contorted. Her carefully maintained facade finally shattering completely. He needed guidance. Structure. The Harrington legacy had to be protected from his weakness. The naked truth of her perspective silenced the room. Even the FBI agents paused, witnessing the mask slip to reveal the monstrous priorities beneath. James stood shakily. Years of programming warring with emerging clarity. My weakness was wanting my own life, he said. Each word strengthening him. Wanting to study literature instead of finance. Wanting to marry for love instead of strategic advantage. His eyes found mine. Was any of it real between us, or was I just following another script? The question pierced me. Despite everything I'd uncovered, despite my justified anger, I couldn't bring myself to twist the knife further. The beginning was real, I answered honestly. Before they intensified the conditioning. That's why I stayed. I saw glimpses of who you really were. Enough to know you were as much a victim as anyone they'd harmed. Outside, police lights now illuminated the night, reflecting off the harbor waters. More federal agents were arriving along with evidence response teams. The Harrington Empire's collapse was accelerating by the minute. Victoria was being formally read her rights. Her posture still regal despite everything crumbling around her. William was already negotiating his legal mind, calculating the benefits of early cooperation. Thomas Whitley sat alone, scribbling what appeared to be a detailed statement, occasionally glancing at James with what might have been regret. I stood at a crossroads. My vengeance was complete. The evidence I'd gathered would ensure justice for the financial crimes, the manipulation, the psychological abuse. I could walk away now, leave James to find his own path through the wreckage. But as I watched him struggling to process decades of psychological manipulation, I recognized something of myself in his disorientation. I had spent 5 years living a double life, maintaining a perfect facade while pursuing secret goals. We had both been changed by the Harringtons' toxic influence. I can help you understand what they did, I offered, surprising myself. I've documented the techniques, the triggers. It might help with your recovery. James looked up, vulnerability and hope warring with shame in his expression. After what I did to you, why would you help me? I touched my split lip, feeling the sting. Because unlike your family, I can distinguish between the puppets and the puppeteers. Around us, the Harrington Empire continued its spectacular implosion. Years of manipulation and deceit exposed to the harsh light of justice. And in that chaos, I made my choice. 6 months after my birthday celebration turned Reve. Lation, I sat in the federal courthouse watching Victoria Harrington enter in handcuffs. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup, replaced by a prison-issued jumpsuit and the power that came from confinement. Still, she held her head high, refusing to acknowledge the spectators who had come to witness the matriarch's downfall. The courtroom was packed with journalists, former business associates, and most importantly, others who had been victimized by the Harrington family over decades. Some I had found through financial records, others had come forward after the initial reports broke. Each carried their own story of manipulation, coercion, or financial destruction. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Matsuda entered. Not Judge Holloway, who had recused himself immediately after my birthday revelation and was now under investigation himself for his role in several questionable Harrington judicial outcomes. The proceedings moved with the inexorable rhythm of justice finally unleashed. The prosecution presented evidence meticulously organized from my files and substantially expanded through the federal investigation that followed: bank records, witness testimonies, psychological evaluations. The truth laid bare beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. Victoria's legal team had crumbled in the preceding months. William Harrington had turned state's evidence almost immediately, prioritizing self-preservation over family loyalty. The prominent defense attorneys initially retained had withdrawn one by one as the depth of the evidence became clear. Now she sat beside a court-appointed defender who seemed overwhelmed by the case's complexity. During a recess, Mara Chin, one of the forensic accountants assigned to the case, approached me in the hallway. "We've traced over $480 million in misappropriated funds," she said quietly. "Your initial estimates were conservative." I nodded, unsurprised. "What about the trust that's the entire sting part?" Mara replied. "The grandfather's original trust document contained ethical operation clauses that the family had suppressed. The court is considering using those original provisions to redirect the assets toward restitution." This development validated my deepest hope that justice wouldn't just mean punishment for the guilty but restoration for the harmed. The Harrington fortune built through generations of manipulation and fraud would be used to heal the damage they had caused. Outside the courthouse steps each afternoon, I met with former employees, business partners, and even family members who had been pushed aside when they questioned Victoria's methods. Each shared pieces of the puzzle I hadn't known, extending the pattern of abuse and control back decades before my involvement with the family. Angela Harrington, James's cousin who had been disinherited at 19 for refusing Victoria's career guidance, became a particularly valuable ally. Her insights into the family dynamics helped prosecutors understand the systematic nature of the psychological manipulation. "They did it to all of us in different ways," she explained during one of our strategy sessions. "But James got the worst of it after his father died. Victoria saw him as the key to everything." Thomas Whitley's testimony proved devastating to Victoria's defense. In exchange for immunity, he provided detailed records of the conditioning techniques employed, the specific triggers installed, and Victoria's explicit instructions regarding James's development. The clinical precision of his notes left no room for doubt about the deliberate nature of the psychological abuse. James himself was absent from the proceedings, receiving treatment at a specialized facility focused on deprogramming and recovery from psychological manipulation. His own legal standing remained complex, both perpetrator and victim. The slap that had been the catalyst for the Harrington downfall was being considered in light of the documented conditioning. I visited him once a month, maintaining professional boundaries while providing information that aided his recovery. The man emerging from beneath the layers of programming was thoughtful, uncertain, and grappling with profound guilt over actions taken under his mother's influence. "I don't know who I am without their directives," he confessed during one visit. Sitting in the facility's garden, the first hints of spring emerging around us. "Even my preferences, foods, clothes, opinions, I'm questioning everything." "That's actually progress," I told him. "The authentic self asks questions, the programmed self follows instructions." He managed a small smile, not the practiced expression I'd grown accustomed to during our marriage. "You never stopped questioning, did you not?" "My nature," I replied. "Maybe that's why the conditioning didn't work on me." What remained unspoken between us was the future of our relationship. The marriage had been built on false premises, manipulated from the start by Victoria's machinations. Yet something authentic had existed briefly before the deeper programming took hold. Whether that could ever be recovered or whether it should remain an open question, neither of us was ready to answer. My own life had transformed completely. I had resigned from Caldwell and Pierce, unable to return to defending corporations after seeing how power could corrupt even the most prestigious institutions. Instead, I established the Cognitive Liberty Legal Foundation, focusing on cases involving psychological manipulation, coercive control, and financial exploitation. Our first clients were former Harrington employees subjected to NDAs and coercive contracts. Within 3 months, we expanded to represent victims of other powerful families and corporations using similar tactics of psychological control. You've essentially created a new practice area, remarked my former mentor when we met for coffee. Psychologue. Eichel freedom as a legal right. The Foundation's work soon extended beyond legal representation. We developed educational programs for law enforcement, judges, and therapists to recognize signs of psychological manipulation. I partnered with cognitive liberty advocates to push for legislative changes, strengthening protections against coercive control. On the day Victoria Harrington was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison for fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy, I sat in the back of the courtroom rather than the front. Her empire had fallen. Justice had been served. My focus had already shifted to the next case, the next victim needing advocacy. As the courtroom emptied, James approached me. His first appearance at the proceedings. He looked different. Thinner, with casual clothes instead of bespoke suits, and eyes that held both sadness and clarity. The trustees approved the restitution plan, he said without preamble. Everyone they harmed will receive compensation, including you. I didn't do this for money, I replied. I know. He hesitated. That's why I asked them to direct my personal share to your foundation instead. It seems fitting that what they intended to control me with should be used to free others. The gesture represented something profound, an act of autonomous choice. Perhaps the first truly independent decision he had made in decades. Thank you, I said simply. We stood there briefly, two people forever changed by the same corrupting influence, now finding our separate paths toward redemption. Your foundation's work, he started, then paused. I'd like to help when I'm further along in recovery. My experience might be useful to others. It might, I agreed. As we parted ways outside the courthouse, neither making promises about the future, I realized that the Harrington saga had never been just about exposing corruption or seeking personal vengeance. It had become something far more meaningful. A reclamation of authentic selfhood from those who would program human beings like software. The path ahead would be challenging, with more powerful families and institutions to confront. But with each case, each client, each small victory, I was building something that Victoria Harrington, with all her wealth and influence, had never possessed. A legacy of liberation rather than control. That, perhaps, was the most perfect form of justice.